Hi, everybody. We are going to start the cardiovascular system today. So we're going to run through the anatomy of it, the flow of the blood. You should have a PowerPoint out there that actually says cardiovascular system PHS2, I believe. Let me make sure that I have the right one pulled up now that I think about it. Well, it may not be exactly the same one that you have loaded, but there's just two pictures that are different, and I'll talk to you about those when we get there. So, cardiovascular system. So the circulatory system, we call it that very frequently, can also be known as cardiovascular system. So cardio is your heart, and vascular is your vessels, the way that the blood travels through the body. So either of those terms can be used interchangeably. So again, it's your heart, the blood vessels, and the blood that it pumps is your cardiovascular system. And the blood system is your transportation. That's how things get from where they're supposed to be. When you eat that candy bar and that Snickers, it's the blood that carries the glucose to your brain so that you're not acting sleepy or drowsy or crazy or those kind of things. It takes oxygen and nutrients out to all the body cells, regardless of where it is in your body, and it pulls carbon dioxide and other waste materials and brings it back up so that it can be taken away from your body as it needs to. So it moves everything. It moves hormones, it moves food, nutrients, vitamins, oxygen, any of that kind of stuff is going to be moved by the blood system. So the hallmark of the cardiovascular system is the heart. Okay, that's what we got to have, right? The heart is the pump. It's a hollow, very muscular organ that functions to pump that blood all the way through the body and back around again. It's about the size of your fist. Okay, so take your fist and kind of lay it on your chest there, and that's about the size of your heart. It lays partway under the sternum, which is the bone right here, hopefully you remember, and partway into the left side of the chest. Okay, so that's why we put our hand on the left side of our chest when we say the pledge every morning, and because that's kind of where the heart lies. Okay, so about the size of your fist. So an infant has a little bitty heart about the size of the infant's fist. Okay, so if I'm 6'8", big old down lineman football player or something, I'm going to have a huge heart too to help pump that blood throughout my body. Okay? So this area here, in between the lungs, is called the mediastinal cavity. Okay, medi means middle, in the middle. So the mediastinal cavity is where the heart, the great vessels, the aorta, the esophagus, the trachea, all of those kind of things. So if it's got to go from here to there, it's going to sit right in the middle in the mediastinal cavity. All right, when we talk about the heart itself, it's made up of 3 layers of tissue. So the first one is endocardium. Hopefully you remember that endo means inside or within. Okay, so endocardium is this inside part, and that's what's actually touching the blood. Okay, think about it. It lines the cavities or the chambers of the heart, and that's where the blood is. The myocardium is this thick muscle wall. Okay, it's white on this second picture. You can see here it's this thick muscle. It takes a lot of muscle and a lot of force to push that blood out where it needs to go. Okay, so myocardium is that thick heart muscle that we think of. The pericardium is the sac that surrounds the heart. So right around the outside of the heart is this thin membranous covering over the heart that allows it to slide easily through that membrane. It's got a little bit of lubrication in there so that the heart pumps easily. There's a little bit of space there you can tell called the pericardial sac. And that's the 3 layers of the heart. Endocardium on the inside, myocardium, that thick muscle layer, and pericardium is the outside because peri means around. All right, then the septum is this muscular wall. You can see it white there on this photo that separates the right and the left sides of the heart. And that's what's going to keep your deoxygenated blood from mixing with your oxygenated blood. So think about it for a second. If I'm mixing my oxygenated blood and my deoxygenated blood all the time, what am I sending out to my body? I'm sending out a half product, right? It's not good blood. It doesn't have enough oxygen in it to support me the way that I need to. So it's very important that we keep the deoxygenated blood separated from the oxygenated so that it's both heading in the right direction that we need. All right, so the heart itself is divided into 4 cavities, and we call those cavities chambers. Okay, there are 4 chambers of the heart, and that's these open areas that receive blood. Okay, so the 2 upper chambers are the atrium. Atrium is one atrium. Atria is 2. Okay, so that's the plural. Atria is the plural. Atrium is the singular. So the 2 lower chambers are called ventricles. So I have 2 atria and 2 ventricles, and they sit on top of each other. Okay, there's one on the right and one on the left of each. So let's talk a little bit about the way the blood flows through the heart. And this should be the PowerPoint that you have. It did come through like I wanted it to. So my body has the blood. It takes it out to where the cells where it needs, and it delivers the oxygen or the nutrients or whatever it is that it needs. Okay? Then it routes it back up to the heart so that it can go through that process again. So as it's coming from my body, it enters through the inferior vena cava and the superior vena cava. Okay, vena means what? Vein or artery? What do you think? Vein, right. So veins bring blood to the heart. Okay, so superior vena cava and inferior. Hopefully you remember back from when we did body directions that superior means above and inferior means below. So that's easy to figure out which one of these is which. So on your diagram, and you have a separate diagram of this as well if you need to make notes. So this is bringing blood back to the heart. And both of those vessels deliver that blood to the right atrium. Okay, the right atrium. So the right side of the heart receives deoxygenated blood. So I've already taken the oxygen out to the cells, and I'm coming back to pick up another load. Think of a train that delivers its load, and then it's got to come back and get some more. Okay? So the right side of the heart, and this is the patient's right. So when you look at it here, it's going to be this side, is deoxygenated blood. Okay? So it's going to deliver it into the right atrium. Then it's going to go through this valve, called the tricuspid valve, that separates the atrium from the ventricle. Okay? So when the atria contract, it pushes blood downward into the ventricles. Okay? So it's like, so the atria contract together and then the ventricles contract. And then the atria contract and the ventricles contract. Okay? So as this contracts, the ventricles open so that it can receive the blood. Okay? Then it squishes out the blood while the atria open to receive blood. And then they squeeze and it goes the other way. Okay? So it's this constantly, the atria on top and the ventricles on the bottom. So it squeezes it down into the ventricles, then the ventricles squeeze it out to the body, and the atria receive more blood. Okay? That's what her heartbeat is. That's what happens every single beat since the time you were about 8 weeks old in your mommy's uterus. Okay? So ventricle or atria and then ventricles. So it goes through this valve. Okay? And the valve, we'll talk about it a little bit more, but it keeps the blood from backflowing up in there. It prevents backwash, okay? So the blood goes from the right atria to the right ventricle. And I've got deoxygenated blood. Remember that, deoxygenated blood. So I've got to get some oxygen in this blood. It's not doing me any good. And where do I get oxygen? I get oxygen from my lungs, okay, when I breathe it in. So it's going to go out this way through the pulmonary artery to the lungs. Okay, so it comes into the heart from the right atrium to the right ventricle, out the pulmonary artery to the lungs, okay, to pick up some oxygen. So all of that blood takes a side trip out to the lungs, picks up some oxygen, and then it comes back through the pulmonary veins and dumps into the other side, okay, the left atrium. And it's the same process. So when the left atrium squeezes it through the mitral valve into the left ventricle, then the left ventricle squirts it out the aorta. And the aorta is this huge artery that then delivers the blood to your brain, your arms, and the rest of your body. Okay, so it's the same process on both sides, only one goes to the lungs and one goes to the body. All right? Now there's a lot of words on this other side. Let's see if that makes sense to us. So the right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from the body, and the right ventricle receives blood from that right atrium and pushes it out to the lungs. The pulmonary vein brings oxygen back to the left atrium and into the left ventricle, which pushes it out the aorta and to the body because it's now oxygenated blood. All right? So let's talk a little bit about these valves. Okay? So it's the way valves in the cardiovascular system are a way to keep blood from backflowing the way you don't want it to go. Okay? So think about it. If I squeeze in here, if I don't have something to block it, when this squeezes it out this way, what's it going to do? It'll just squish back up in there if I don't have some way to stop it from doing that. And that's what a valve is. So when this contracts, these things push up and it closes the door to the atrium so that the blood is going in the forward direction that we want it to. Now, people can have problems with their valves, and it causes what we call regurgitation, where you get some mixing of this blood here. And the problem is that I'm not getting a full load out, right? So I always kind of have this sluggish blood in my heart if my valves aren't working appropriately. So the valve closes when the ventricle contracts to keep the blood from going back up in there. And it closes here as well to keep that blood from backflowing into the heart. There are 4 valves. The first one is the tricuspid, and this is on the right side of the heart, okay, between the right atrium and the right ventricle. And again, it closes when that ventricle contracts to keep the blood from backflowing up into the atrium. Okay, I also have the pulmonary valve. I hope you know that pulmonary means lungs. Okay, anytime you see this word, it means it has something to do with the lungs. Okay, so the pulmonary valve is between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery, or when that blood is heading out to the lungs. Okay, it closes when that ventricle contracts to allow that blood not to backflow in there as it's sending it to the lungs. Then on the left side of the heart, we've got between the atrium and the ventricle, it's called the mitral valve. Some people call it a bicuspid. Either one is correct. Okay? And again, that closes when the left ventricle is pushing blood into the aorta, or keeps blood from flowing back up into that left atrium. Keeps it going in the right direction. And then we have a valve between the aorta and the ventricle. So we have a valve on each side between the atria and the ventricle, and then we have a valve on the big vessels that it heads out to, so either the pulmonary artery or the aorta. Those are the 4 valves. Okay? Again, keeps blood from backflowing. Here's a little picture. Some of them are bicuspid, which means they have 2 little flaps. Some of them are tricuspid, which means they have 3 flaps. Don't worry about that a whole lot. All right, so the right and the left sides of the heart work together, even though they're separated in the middle by the septum. Now, what I want you to do, too, is to make an extra note here. I want you to write the acronym LORD, L-O-R-D, okay? I don't know if you can see this on here or not. LORD, L-O-R-D. And the L stands for left, and the O for oxygenated. Okay, left is the oxygenated side of the heart. Right is the deoxygenated. Because for me, it's always kind of hard to remember which side is which. But now, since someone taught me this last year, I'm on it. Okay, so left side of the heart has oxygenated blood, and the right side of the heart has deoxygenated blood. Okay, I took the picture out that has the colors, but oftentimes when you see a diagram of the heart, oh, here's one. It will show it in blue and red. Okay? How many of you believe that your blood is blue until it hits oxygen in the air? I've heard that a million times. When you get a cut, that's when it turns red. That is not true. Your blood is the color your blood is when it's in your body. The deal is that oxygen is what makes your blood that bright red color. Okay? When oxygen is attached to the hemoglobin, that's what makes it bright red. So deoxygenated blood is red, it's just dark. Think about if you get blood drawn. That's from a vein, so that's going to be deoxygenated blood, and it's very dark, the blood that you get in a blood tube. If you were to cut an artery that's carrying oxygenated blood, then it's going to be more of a bright red. Okay? So we indicate in drawings, the right side is blue and the left side is red, just to help us get a visual picture that one is oxygenated and one is deoxygenated. Okay? But it's not really blue blood. It's just dark red. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. So what causes that muscle to contract? How does it get on that system? That is an electrical impulse. Okay? We're going to talk about that in just a second. So an electrical impulse hits that muscle and makes it contract. I think we talked about that when we talked about muscles, where like in physical therapy, they'll put a band on you that has electrical impulses in it, and it forces that muscle to contract, to make it stronger. Okay? It's the same thing that happens in your heart. And it's in a very systematic way. You can see that how chaotic it would be if you had an atrial firing and a ventricle and an atria. It just doesn't work. It has to be in sync in order for it to work effectively. So during each of those cycles, like I said, that atria has to relax in order to receive more blood. Okay, so in order for it to fill up, it's got to be relaxed. That relaxation period is called diastole. Okay, diastole. That's the relaxed period. It correlates with your diastolic blood pressure. Okay, and then when the ventricles contract to push that blood out to your body, it's called systole. Okay, you absolutely have to know what those words mean. I'll tell you right now. Definitely be a test question. So the period of rest is diastole, period of contraction, systole. All right. So again, this is just describing that the atria contract and then the ventricle contract. The atria contract and then the ventricle contract, and they fill with blood. And it's that contraction, relaxation that happens to generate that pump. Okay? So blood on the right side of the heart is low in oxygen and high in carbon dioxide, and it's the opposite on the other side. Oxygenated blood is high in oxygen and low in carbon dioxide. Okay? So let's talk about that electrical system a little bit. So those electrical impulses are originating within the heart to send that impulse to create that heartbeat. Okay? And it starts in what we call the sinoatrial or the SA node. Okay? Sinoatrial or SA node is where those nerve cells are created that send out that electrical impulse to make the heart contract. And we call that the pacemaker. Okay? The SA node is the pacemaker. And it establishes the rhythm of the heartbeat. The atrial muscles contract, and then the ventricle muscles contract. Atria and then ventricle. All right? So after that impulse, and this is located in the right atrium. Okay? The sinoatrial node is located in the right atrium. After it goes through the atria, so it fires off this electrical impulse through the atrium that causes it to contract. And then it hits the AV node, the atrioventricular node, which is closer to the junction of all four chambers. Okay, the AV node. And then it sends it through something called the bundle of His, and we'll look at a diagram here in just a second. And the bundle of His comes through the septum, into the bundle branches, and into the Purkinje fibers. Okay, so let's look at this diagram. So here is the SA node, and it's going to send out these electrical impulses through the atria, and the atrias are going to contract. That impulse is going to hit the AV node, which is right here at the junction of all four, atrioventricular, okay, right there at the middle. Then it's going to go down to the bundle of His, this part right here in the septum that has it all together. Then it branches into a right bundle branch and a left bundle branch, because I have two ventricles, right? So it's going to be the right and the left bundle branches. And then as it comes down here, it also breaks down into these small little fibers called Purkinje fibers. Okay? So there's 5 steps, I believe. The SA node, the AV node, the bundle of His, the bundle branches, and the Purkinje fibers. So that's what causes it. So the atria contract, and then the stimulus comes here. It feeds through the ventricles, and the ventricles contract. You will need to know those steps in order as well. So make sure that you have an understanding of what those are and the cycle that they go through. Okay, it occurs about every 0.8 seconds. Again, from the time you were in your mother's uterus till when your heart started beating until you die. Okay, my mother is 95 years old. She's going to be 95 in 2 months. Think about how many heartbeats that is. That's a whole lot of heartbeats, 60 to 100 every minute. So what we do is we can get an electrocardiogram, and what an electrocardiogram does is it tracks that electricity. Okay, it tracks the electricity in the heart, and that's what we see here. Okay, so the P is where the atria are contracting. The QRS is where the ventricles are contracting. This wave is when the ventricles are relaxed and getting ready to go again. So we can tell by looking at these patterns on the electrical activity when there is damage to the heart. So if there's a heart attack or they are having some other issue, the heart's beating too fast, too slow, it's got a blockage somewhere, all that kind of stuff, they can tell by watching this and pick up any abnormal heart activity or disease. Okay? So an EKG or ECG is the same thing, but we're picking up that electrical activity that occurs in the heart. That's what that is. All right, so that's it for the A&P of the heart. Y'all got that? You also have a handout, a diagram that is very good that has this system on it, and I've loaded it out there on your folder. I think it's pretty clear. Let me show you real quick on the document camera before we move on. Okay, so you can see the SA node sends it out through the atria, it hits the AV node, it goes to the bundle of His, through the bundle branches, and then you have the Purkinje fibers there. Okay, while I have the camera on, I also wanted to show you, you have this handout if you need it. You will also be, I have diagrams of this with the words blanked out. You will need to be able to identify the structures that are on this diagram. Okay, so be sure to study this because, again, you will see this in a testing scenario where you need to fill in what those structures are. And then you also have out there this diagram that just talks about the pulmonary circulation. And what I think is a good idea is if you guys would print these off and then get you a red marker and a blue marker and follow the arrows. Okay, so if it's coming back to the heart, I'm going to color these blue. I have an example here if you can see it very well. Okay, and it just makes you walk through the steps of where is this blood going, and I think it kicks in a little bit better in your thought process on what's blue, which is deoxygenated, and what's red, which is oxygenated. So use those tools that you've been given to try to understand better where that blood flow is going. Okay. If you're confused on any of that, please send me an email. I'd be happy to try to talk through it again or answer any questions that you have. I know it's pretty complex to think about, but once you can get it in your mind on how that blood flows, it's kind of the same on both sides, it gets a little easier. All right, let's talk about blood vessels real quick, the second component of the cardiovascular system. We have three types of blood vessels. We have arteries, capillaries, and veins. Okay? So arteries carry blood away from the heart. Okay? A and A. That's how you can remember that. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. The aorta is the largest artery in the body. Okay, remember it's that one that comes off the top that has those three vessels sticking up, and it receives blood from the left ventricle, that oxygenated blood as it goes out to the body. So it curves up over the heart and comes back down through the chest and the abdomen, and it starts branching off. Okay, just like a river branches into little creeks and tributaries and those kind of things. The arterial system does the same thing, so that it can continually to branch out and get the blood down to the smallest vessels that we need. Okay? So the smallest vessels are called arterioles. Arterioles. Oles means small arteries, small arteries. So aorta is the largest artery. Arterioles are the smallest. Capillaries. Capillaries are this microscopic bed of vessels that kind of connect the artery system and the vein system. So when I say that oxygenated blood, deoxygenated blood, all this kind of stuff, at some point those have to meet. Okay? It has to take a U-turn. I'm going to send this blood out. It's got to make a U-turn and come back up. Okay? The U-turn occurs in the capillary beds. This is where all the gases are exchanged. This is where the nutrients are exchanged. These little capillary walls are only 1 cell thick. Okay, they're microscopic. You can't even see them, and they're everywhere. They're in my hands. They're fingernails everywhere. And that's where that exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide occurs. Okay? So once it picks up that carbon dioxide, it starts to feed it into the vein system so that it can come back to the heart. Okay? So veins carry blood toward the heart. Arteries carry it out there. Veins bring it back. They contain valves. So we talked about the valves in the heart that keeps the backflow so that you don't always have that mixture of blood. The same thing occurs in the veins of your body, because the veins really are not, they're kind of weak little vessels. Arterioles or arteries kind of have a muscular layer, and they can hold their own. They can push blood all they need to. But veins, they kind of need the help of your leg muscles and everything else to get the blood flowing. So it tends to backflow if you don't have valves. So it pushes it up and then it rests against the valve, and pushes it up and rests against the valve. So remember that the vein system has valves. Again, V and V. That's easy to remember. Venules are the smallest veins. Okay? The superior and the inferior vena cava are the largest veins in the body. Remember, they're coming from the top of the body and the bottom of the body to dump blood into that right atrium. Okay? Superior vena cava brings blood from the upper part of my body, again, my arms, my head, and the inferior vena cava brings blood from the lower part of my body, my abdomen, my legs, all of that, and they both drain into that right atrium. All right, let's talk about blood. Blood is often called a tissue, the liquid tissue, because it has so many different kinds of cells in it. It's just not a single thing. It's just a huge component of a mixture of things. Each average adult, has about 4 to 6 quarts of blood. So 1 gallon to 1.5 gallons. If you can think about that, 1 gallon of milk to 1.5 gallons of milk. And it circulates continuously through the body. Okay? It transports oxygen from the lungs to the cells. It takes carbon dioxide back to the lungs to get rid of. It carries nutrients from the digestive system, waste products. It carries heat that is produced, and it carries hormones that are produced in the different endocrine organs that you have. Okay, so absolutely a needed component. Now, it has some cells, and it has what we call plasma. So plasma is 90% water. Okay, it is the liquid portion of blood. And it carries lots of things. Lots of things are dissolved in it. Blood proteins, such as your clotting factors, fibrinogen and prothrombin, nutrients, vitamins, and carbohydrates, minerals and electrolytes like potassium, calcium, sodium, all those kind of things that our body needs to function. The gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide, waste products, hormones, and enzymes are carried in the plasma. And if you siphon off plasma, that's what it looks like. If you pull the red cells out of it, it's kind of this golden color, watery substance. All right, blood cells. Blood cells are called erythrocytes. Erythro means red, and cyte means cell. Okay, so red blood cells are RBCs, but we'll probably be calling them erythrocytes most of the time in this class. So you need to know that term. Red blood cells are produced in your bone marrow. Okay, what is your bone marrow? Remember we talked about the skeletal system. It's that inner core of the long bones, and that's where red blood cell production occurs. And they look like little lifesaver kind of things, where they're concave in the middle and a little round. They don't have a nucleus. Their function is to transport. Okay? They live about 120 days, and then they start getting broken down by the liver and the spleen. And then you're generating new, or you should be generating new all the time. They do have this complex protein called hemoglobin. Okay? Hemoglobin is what the oxygen and the carbon dioxide attaches to. That's how it gets transported. So you have to have red blood cells in order to get oxygen out to your body. Okay? And you have to have good hemoglobin. Normal count is 4.5 to 5.5 million per cubic millimeter. So per 1 drop of blood, you have 4.5 to 5.5 million red blood cells in 1 drop of blood. Isn't that fascinating? I just think that's amazing and how small that is. And that's what's circulating through your body, carrying that oxygen where it needs to go. All right. In our blood, we also have white cells. Leuco means white. Cytes is cell, okay, or WBCs, white blood cells. Now, we don't have near as many of these as we have erythrocytes, but they're also made in the bone marrow, and they usually live only 3 to 9 days. Okay, remember we said red cells live 120 days. White cells are only for about a week and a half. And their main function is to fight infection. They go around looking for viruses, bacteria, any of that kind of stuff that it doesn't like. And it does it by a process called phagocytosis. Okay, phago means to eat or swallow. Cyte is cell, and osis is abnormal process, abnormal condition. So again, it's the way that the white blood cells ingest the bacteria or the virus or whatever and kind of take it over and digest it, okay, so that we don't get sick from it. This is our main, or one of our main defenses against disease, is our white blood cells. So if you're sick, say you've been running a fever for a couple of days, your throat hurts, you have sore throat, strep throat, something like that, if they do a blood test, chances are that your white blood count will be elevated, okay, because the body kicks in and it's like, oh my God, we got to fight this thing. And it starts producing more. Okay, so when you do that blood count, that's one of the main things they're looking for, is what is your white blood cell count? Is the body ramped up against something that tells us that there's a foreign substance in our body, a pathogen? Now there's 5 different types. I'm not going to expect that you memorize these, but just so you know, they break these down on that lab test as well, so they can kind of tell if it's fighting a bacteria, or is it an allergic reaction? Is it a virus? What kind of organism is going on in there? And they can tell that by that blood system. Normal count for white cells is about 5,000 to 10,000. All right, and the third component is thrombocytes, or platelets. Okay, thrombo means clot. Again, cytes means cell. So thrombocytes form clots. Again, these are made in the bone marrow. They also live about 5 to 9 days. And it's very important for the clotting process to stop bleeding. Okay, that's internal and external. Think about it. A bruise is just bleeding underneath the skin. That's what a bruise is. You bust those veins and that blood comes out, and somehow it has to stop or you'll just keep bleeding. So that's where thrombocytes come in, or platelets. So when there's a cut or an injury or anything like that, those thrombocytes rush to the scene and start to stick together. Okay, they make a plug. That's the goal, is they want to plug off that hole so that it can heal. They secrete a chemical that makes the blood vessel narrow and spasm, okay? Because I'm not going to lose as much blood through that hole as I am through that hole, right? So I want it to constrict, so it's going to constrict and do that. It also releases another enzyme that forms a substance called thrombin. and fibrin, and that sort of starts to create this net of substances, thrombocytes and platelets and cells and those kind of things, to create that stoppage, to keep that from bleeding. Okay, it's very effective for most injuries. Some it's not; they have to have a little help. And there's about 250 to 400,000 per cubic millimeter of those. Okay, so think about when you, they always tell you if you have a nosebleed, don't blow your nose. Okay, and that's because you may have worked and worked to get that bleeding to stop. Okay, you've held your nose, you put ice on it, you did whatever, and finally your nose stops, your nosebleed stops, because you have created a clot. You created a clot and you stopped it. And then what's the next thing you want to do? You want to blow your nose. So people will go over and get a Kleenex and blow their nose. And what have we just done? We just got rid of all this work that we just did. And it's going to start bleeding again. And it's got to start all over. So it's a plug. It's a sticky mass of cells that's going to stop that bleeding. All right, I'm not going to talk about abnormal components today. I think that's plenty for today. We will continue on tomorrow. We'll probably talk a little bit and then work on a worksheet that you have out there as an assignment. And then we'll do abnormals probably the day after that. All right? So you guys have a great day, and we'll see you later. Bye.